Namaste and welcome back to Waking Up with Mindful Serenity Yoga and Nancy. And we're going to continue answering questions from the jar. Once again, this little exercise is here mostly for me to help assimilate the knowledge that I've gained over the years with my yoga practice and my studying of other ancient wisdom traditions, as well as poetry, psychology, philosophy, and whatnot. So I like to come here and share because I believe I learn better when I teach and I teach better when I learn. So the two go hand in hand together. I do not call myself by any means a spiritual teacher or a guru by or master or anything like that. Far from it. I am far from awakened. I am just learning like most of you are. And like I said, I come here because teaching helps me to learn better. That being said, I tend to do this practice of answering a spiritual question from a jar within a 10-minute time frame. Some of these questions come from my yoga students, other questions come from my family or friends, and some come from me when I'm thinking up. And sometimes I just go to the net and say, oh, give me a good spiritual question to put in the jar. And that's where these questions are coming from. So by no means are my answers perfect, or nor will they be perfect. It's not my intention to make them perfect. I'm also not asking you to believe everything I have to say. Listen if you dare to and see if it resonates within you to some truth that you already have been within you, because the greatest teacher is always that one that is inside us. So please keep that in mind and don't take anything I have to say bluntly. So once again, I will reach into the jar. Excuse me. Oh, wrong. I'll pull the jar over here before I knock something down. And we'll pull that question out. Oh, I got a big one. Ooh, it's going to be a big one. Okay. And the question I pulled out is, I'm going to see if I can make out the writing. Explain the id, ego, and superego in yogic terms. Okay. 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 I think I can handle this one. I'm not sure. So explain the id, ego, and superego in yogic terms. I am going to set my watch. I do try to do it within 10 minutes. I have been going over my time frame, and I don't like to do that. Deep breath. Speaking of the ego, we want to get rid of it. The ego, of course, is just a mental construct that this idea we have of who we think we are. So, self-concept. So explain the id, ego, and superego in yogic terms. So I studied both facets of this, of the ego, and because I study psychology, I was very familiar with Freud's interpretation of the id, the ego, and the superego. So we have three concepts or three parts of the personality, or the way we represent ourselves in front of society, and that is based on the id, the ego, and the superego. The id is the biological, most primeval part of us, that part that operates from the primitive brain, the body sensations, what the body needs, as far as our cravings and our desires, what the body needs in order to feel good. The most basic desires is the id, and it operates from that. Then we have on the other spectrum of the id, the superego, and the superego is more or less our conscience, what we were conditioned to believe is right and good, and the external social sanctioning we get for our behaviors and our choices, and that helps to determine who we are, what we're told we are by society, how we should behave by society. Then we have that operating our personality. And in the middle of it, we have the ego, and it's like that part of us is trying to make sense of body desires and needs and what society or external forces are telling us. So right in the middle is the ego. So that's Freud's interpretation of um, of that. So the id basically is what the body is telling us to do and be. The superego is telling us what society and those around us, external forces, are telling us how we should do, or how we should be and what we should do. And the ego is that part in the middle, as a Michael Singer said one time, is that part in the middle is trying to keep us sane because we have these two pulling forces. Of course, what the body wants is not necessarily what society is going to tell you want. The body may want to, for example, kill somebody, has this to protect itself, see something it wants to eat, like another human being or something. And society says, no, 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 we don't eat other humans, so you can't do that. And the ego is saying, it's in that part that's being pulled by the body and pulled by society and has to come up with the decision, listening to both sides, what it should do. So that is Freud's term, Freud's definition of the id, ego, and superego. But I like to look at it this way: is that the ego is a compilation of all. My goodness, I can't talk today. Copulation of all these three things. The ego is this personality that we think we are. It's this body with its needs and desires and its senses, what it's picking up from the environment and how it's making sense of it, which is the id part of the ego or the personality. Then we have the superego, which is listening to all those things that we've been told since we were a baby, the religions we were born into, the families we were born into, the societies and cultures we were born into, traditions and beliefs we took on as our own. That is the superego, molding this personality. So our most basic desires are the id, the molding of those basic desires by social and external conditioning is the superego. And here we are in the middle, the personality that tries to make sense of this world that we're in. Neither the id or the ego or the superego is who we are at the most deepest levels. In fact, that is a very superficial thing, the id, the ego, and the superego. It is not who we are. It's just who we think we are and who we've come to believe we are. We recognize what the body is experiencing, what it wants, what it needs, what it likes, what it doesn't like. And at the same time, we get all this conditioning around us, molding this liking and this disliking that we do into something that can be assimilated into some type of moral construct that society has created. So we have that molding from the outside and that inner needing and desiring from the inside. And then we have this ego, this personality that's trying to make sense of just being here. And so it comes up and it's being pulled between the body and society and trying to come up with something that makes sense to it, thus our personality. I've often talked about my view of the ego as being a twin type of phenomenon, that we have two sides to this ego. We have the redeemer ego and we have the shamer ego. Many of us operate from the shamer ego, the sense of not being enough, not being fairly worthless unless we meet this social conditioning and have its approval, right? So because of our bodies, we may feel guilt and shame because of what our bodies needs and likes and don't like and what we go about to do it. So we have this shaming instinct in us that we're just not good enough or worthy. And so we go out to prove ourselves to the social conditioning, the superego, by redeeming ourselves in any way we can, by getting the best job, having the best partner, meeting social expectations to a T, making sure that we appear a certain way physically, that we only show certain amounts of our emotions, that we only relay thoughts that society will say are appropriate, that we hide all our other things in what Jung would call the shadow selves, not allowing them to be expressed because we need this approval and validation from our superego consciousness, that part of us that relates to external environments. And at the same time, we have all these biological needs, all these cravings, all these desires coming from the inside at the most primitive level, telling us this is what we need to survive, but this is also what we like, and this is also what we don't like, so we're behaving based on that. So we have these two, so then we have the ego in the middle trying to make sense of all this, and this is what we call our ego. It tends to be this mixed up broken mind, and we think that's who we are, so we listen. And so in Freud's term, the ego was a good thing because it was helping make sense and regulating these two sanctions of our mind. And in the yogic term, we realize that we're neither of these three things. We are that which exists beyond it, beneath it, watching, witnessing, experiencing this human being have this personality with the three segments, the id, the ego, and the superego. But really, neither of those things. We are simply the observers of it. And when we don't identify with either section, the id, the ego, or the superego, when we get beyond our say our id, uh, our idness through pratyahara in yoga, for example, when we can get beyond their senses, our attraction to the sensory input, and our need for sensory input in pratyahara, we're doing pretty good. And when we can get beyond the superego and what we've learned through our practice, releasing some scaras, releasing, detaching from the world, not necessarily renouncing, but seeing that we don't need all the things society tells us we need. And without society's approval, we still will be here. We still will be strong. We will still be existing. Then when we get that, then we'll fall into the ego that we recognize and say, oh, then who am I? And then the ego can go beyond that even to the question, yeah, I mean, like, who am I really beyond all these three things? How can I make it? Uh, how can I make myself see that? Who am I? It's not what my body wants or needs or senses. It's not what society's telling me is right or good. And it's not this mediator in between them trying to keep me sane that I need to listen to. I need to ask the question, who am I beyond all this? And that is the difference between Freud's version of the id, ego, and superego and a yogi's. If that makes any sense whatsoever. I'm not sure it does. But thank you so much for listening, and I hope to see you again very shortly. Namaste.